I had the chief accounting officer of a credit union tell me that his best hires in the anti-terrorism unit were English majors because they're good at recognizing patterns. And so I use that example all the time to tell students and parents that they have to be able to articulate the value of what they're studying.
Welcome to Being the Change, the official podcast of James Madison University, brought to you by Madison Magazine. Each episode brings to you stories of how members of the JMU community combine intellect with action to live lives of purpose and meaning. That's Being the Change.
What's up, JMU? Andy Perrine here. Welcome to Being the Change. Today we're going to be talking about the University Career Center and the relationship between an education at JMU and the world of work. And with us, we've got two terrific experts on the topic. Myles Surrett, who is the Associate Vice President for Career, Experiential Learning, and Transitions, and Libby Westley, who's Director of the University Career Center. Welcome to you both.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Well, I really do want to spend a good amount of time exploring the relationship between an education at JMU and the world of work and how students relate to your services and avail themselves and eventually wind up successfully out there in quote unquote the real world. But the headline I'd really like to begin with is the annual first year career outcomes report, because JMU does exceptionally well in this area and consistently better than a lot of our peer institutions. So, Myles, Libby, why don't you open it up with describing the report and this year's results?
Sure. Happy to talk about the outcomes report. So we survey graduates within 6 months of graduating to find out what are they doing. And based on our survey from last year, 95.3% of the class of 23 had an outcome.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
That means they were in full-time employment, part-time employment, they were in graduate school, or they were doing a fellowship, something like the Peace Corps or an AmeriCorps program.
Or the military.
Military, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, how does that stack up compared to other institutions?
Yeah, so we report this data earlier than some folks do. Libby's team does a great job getting the information in efficiently and running a really smooth process. So we don't have a ton of comparative data for the class of 2023 yet, but looking at class of 2022 and years past, I mean, JMU is well above the national average for all institutions and well above the R2 average as well. I think looking back at 2022, I think those are both sort of low to mid 80s sort of numbers. So I mean, about 10 percentage points higher than the national average.
Well, I took a look at some of our peer institutions within the state because they post the same kind of report, and they're roughly in the mid 80s, and here we are in the mid 90s. What is it about the JMU graduate you think that allows them to be so quickly successful in the job market?
I think there's a lot of experiences that are built into the curriculum. I think it starts when they come from orientation and how we talk about what the JMU experience is to them and then how they process that during their time. So, their coursework is their most important asset for whatever kinds of jobs, internships, graduate programs they're applying for. And when you hear students talking about their favorite classes, that energy and light is so catching and energizing for employers. And when students are able to talk specifically about that, it makes them more memorable in employers' minds. And so an employer who doesn't have a background in history can, when they hear students talk about what were some of the courses they studied, what did they learn in that class, how did they learn it, were they synthesizing large amounts of information, were they working with data sets, then they start talking the same language that the employers are. So I think the academic background is one for that. But then students have the opportunity to be involved in clubs and organizations, take advantage of internships and work-based learning experiences, do undergraduate research, participate in community service. All of these things that are out there make JMU and our students great.
And I've heard employers describe JMU alumni as quickly productive. They're the intensely social nature of JMU, I think, either attracts a particular kind of kid or prepares a student to be the sort of employee that shows up and works well on teams, doesn't expect immediate leadership positions. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, I had a great conversation early this summer. So I also work with our orientation office, and I was in a training with our orientation peer advisors, and I asked them this like broad question that I thought was going to lead a different direction.
And the peer advisors are students,
right? Exactly. Yeah, these are returning students who are supporting and mentoring incoming students. And I asked them, what do we do here? That's what I asked them, and I had a different
just
direction.
Generally.
Yeah. What do we do here? And I had a different direction that I was planning on the conversation going. And then one of them, her name's Abby Deere. She's been an OPA for the last 2 years. She's amazing. She just sort of totally rocked me on my heels because she really distilled something very clearly to me. She said, this is a place of service.
Great.
And I think that is so true in terms of how it shows up for students after they graduate. Our students at JMU, they're not here for the artifice. They're not here as a sort of tangential grab of prestige. They're here because they love this place and they serve while they're here. And I think you see that. I mean, you look at the career outcomes report. I mean, we're so proud at JMU of how many nurses and teachers we produce every year.
Right.
And I mean, just looking at this year's data, I mean, there were 226 JMU graduates that are currently teaching in Virginia just from that class. And for the nurses, I mean, it's a similarly, it's 167, which for both of those.
Just in the class of 23.
Just in the class of 2023. So think about, there's 226 classrooms in the Commonwealth of Virginia right now that are being filled just in this one class by JMU graduates. And so I think that there's this, this preparation to serve that is really ingrained, and some of that likely has to do with the history of the university, but is so ingrained in what it is. Every other place that I've worked has never been really cool to want to be a teacher, and that's just how things are here. And I think that's indicative of a broader spirit of service that exists at the university that pays off for folks once they go into the work world, because they do know how to be on teams. They do know how to identify the common goal and then work towards that goal. And those are really, really, really powerful things for employers.
And to our listeners of the Being the Change podcast, Myles and I did not discuss this beforehand, so it's not a setup that he's talking about the university being service-oriented when he's on a podcast called Being the Change. And I love the fact that you cited those numbers of teachers and nurses, because I know our friends in Richmond are very interested in making sure that the shortages that we've got in the public school system and in the healthcare system are really addressed by graduating lots of quality teachers and nurses. So it's a great fact. Now, I've also been hearing and reading that post-pandemic, employers are seeing some troubling signs of students being able to quickly integrate into the workspace. What are you hearing from employers, since you work so closely with so many on that topic in particular?
I think employers are, we've all had to figure out how are we going to respond to this. I think we all have to be more patient with each other and with some of the learning. But I do think, we're trying to get our students prepared so that the learning curve isn't as steep for them. And I think that's been a hallmark of JMU's education the whole time. So I know, kind of adding to what Myles talked about related to service, I think another of the things that makes JMU special is that adapting to change. And I graduated from JMU back in the day, and I remember, some of the administrators that I got to intern and shadow, that's one of the things that they talked was so important, was that ability to adapt to change. And as I followed JMU my whole career, JMU has done that. And so, I think that is props to the faculty, staff, and administration that are here way longer than our students, that are preparing our students to be successful there.
Well, that's one of the things that we use being the change to describe. It's not only just about service, it's about being able to change yourself as well. I know that both of you have worked at other universities, Myles at Clemson and GW, and Libby, you at Davidson and Christopher Newport. How does the particular environment at JMU differ from some of the other places where you've held similar positions?
I think JMU is very accessible, and I've always appreciated that. JMU, when I applied, this was the only place I applied, and, my mother said, it's like you owned the place when you walked in. And so I think some of that is how students feel when they come onto campus. Like they see that, yes, I see how this is going to play out for me. I think, so that accessibility kind of both ways, like that JMU is a place where they can find their way, but also a place that they contribute. I think that is critical.
Now, you're coming off of a very successful career fair that just occurred in the Atlantic Union Bank Center, which is a new location for the fair. Tell us about the reasons why it was so successful.
I mean, I think the main reason why I was successful was a lot of hard work by the folks in the University Career Center and around campus. I mean, Libby just shared some information. I think, Libby, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think it's 124 volunteers, whether student, staff, or faculty, supported over the 2 days to help carry things in for employers, get them to their tables, make sure that they were, set up, have conversations with them. Part of this work is to make employers feel good about being here and excited and in a good headspace when they're talking to students. So, I mean, it was a lot of hard work, and I think that was a big part of it. But I mean, there's been a targeted effort over the last couple of years to get ready for this change and to prepare for this. But I mean, generally speaking, we knew the fair, at least in recent memory, has been in the Festival Student Center. And we knew that we were just outgrowing the space. And we wanted to be able to accommodate more employers, but we also wanted the student experience to be better and for there to be a better flow and for it to be less crowded and just using that space made that possible. So I hope that we'll also see that the student experience, not only in terms of outcomes, but on the day of, in terms of being able to get to space, hear better, all that sort of stuff. And we were very fortunate to partner with athletics in the use of AUBC as well. And they were great hosts.
Yeah, they're great over there. And the space is like, you can't not feel sort of charged up because of that space is so beautiful. And you had more employers here than before. How did that come about?
Well, that's one of the advantages of moving to the AUBC is that we have the capacity for more of that. And so now that gives us the opportunity to continue to grow that and to even figure out, like, who do we have at career fairs, who's missing, and how do we try to bring them in employer-wise. The other thing that we're trying to do with the career fair is we tell all students, all class years, all majors, we want every student coming to the university career fairs. And the reason why that's so important is because it's an opportunity for students to practice talking about themselves. And so the first time you get asked that, tell me about yourself-ish question, or the first time you're delivering your elevator pitch, it doesn't usually come out well. And so we tell students, go to the career fair, allot about 30 minutes. You can probably talk to 5 organizations. That's 5 chances to practice. And so, kind of building that in as well, where we also work with the employers to make sure that they understand that we're going to have underclassmen there as well as seniors. And we have a lot of alums that come back and represent their organization. I think it was probably 25-30% of all of the employer reps were alumni.
That's great.
And so those are great people for students to practice, get that first experience out, and have something already in common that they know from the get-go.
Well, I've read that that students don't often think of coming to the Career Center until they begin to get into their upper class years, their junior and senior year, because the real world, quote unquote, is looming before them. What is your experience with students reaching out and availing themselves of the Career Center services, and how more efficacious is it if they do it sooner than later?
Well, I think there's research out there that shows that the sooner that students understand the application of what they're learning to their goals, then they're more likely to be retained, and they'll enjoy their education or value it more and be able to put more in and get more out of it.
Oh, so they're understanding their classes in the context of applying it.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes. So that's what we're trying to make sure happens throughout their experience. And, a lot of times the gen ed classes introduce students to disciplines they had no idea existed before. And so when students find a new discipline that they enjoyed, that sparks their interest, maybe it's not the direction they go for their major, but something interesting that they learned, again, I think that makes them interesting people and their comfort in being able to talk about that. The other thing I love about, the education experience is our students are taking classes in all different disciplines all the time. And so that's how they learn to come at problems from different perspectives. So I think we can learn as much from students as students learn from us, faculty and staff, because they're living that interaction of all these disciplines every day. We might be focused on teaching one particular discipline. So, that's why the education setting is just so great, because of all of that can come together.
Well, you mentioned the general education program, and at JMU it's called the Human Community, and it's based on 5 different clusters of different sorts of coursework. And what's so fascinating to me about the student experience as compared to alumni recalling their experiences, often you see in the Breeze articles about why do I have to take these courses that aren't related to my major or my interests. And always we hear from alumni, I wish I'd paid better attention in my gen ed courses. I wish I'd showed up for more lectures on things that I wasn't necessarily focused on. And we also hear from employers that, they want kids who are technically and professionally prepared, but a lot of the things that they learn in the gen ed, like, being able to understand analogy, work on teams, those are the sorts of things that they really put a premium on.
Yeah, I think the general I'm a product of the liberal arts myself and work in a very different space now than what I was, than what I was technically educated for, and I continue to find value in the education that I got, in the very broad education that I got. And so, yeah, I think that there's real power there, as I've certainly heard Libby say before, and maybe she'll say it differently now, but I think a key part is building that bridge of meaning from your coursework to how you're communicating to employers. That's one of the most, if you can catch a student who's really passionate about a class, and you can get them talking to employers in an applied way about that, that's going to be one of the best sells that they could possibly make, because it's showing, again, they understand the goal, they understand the process, they understand the content, and now they're telling you about how they got excited about it, they're engaged. A student that's going and talking to an employer who's excited, engaged, they're going to sell themselves really well that way. And so it's a good bridge between the skills that they're developing and then how they're able to communicate.
Go ahead, Libby.
I had a couple of fun stories.
Yeah.
Stories I share often, but I had the chief accounting officer of a credit union tell me that his best hires in the anti-terrorism unit were English majors because they're good at recognizing patterns. And so I use that example all the time to tell students and parents that they have to be able to articulate the value of what they're studying. I didn't major in English. I took English classes, but I don't remember all of that. But if I had majored in English, recognizing patterns would have been a hallmark of how I went about doing things. But the person who didn't major in English doesn't know that. So our students' ability to talk about that is great. But I also think that shows kind of the transferability of what students are learning in disciplines to the work world. So you don't have to have been a business major to work at a business. And so we help students to understand that and to be able to develop the narrative of which stories they want to tell that show that. And then we also use that to educate employers about here are some other ways to look for students or other pieces that you might find that skill you're looking for. Here are some where that might be embedded in the classes or in the kinds of experiences. So there's a lot we do in the University Career Center to help these two populations kind of understand each other and relate well and be able to articulate what are they looking for, what do they have.
Well, that's a really interesting point, Libby. I'm glad you made it. And since the two of you sort of represent the nexus point between the university and employers, and you're describing the fact that that consulting firms are coming back looking for English majors because of their pattern recognition ability. Explain to us and our listeners, and maybe try to dispel the misconception that a lot of the coursework, like English, like history, like philosophy and religion, it's really fundamental to developing not only a person who understands the world and can live a meaningful life, but also is a valuable team member in an organization.
Yeah, I mean, this speaks, I think, to the broader efforts for the university to be the national model for engaged learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what we have a campus that is engaged. We have, that's that service piece.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, think about Safer Eds as an example. I mean, giving hundreds of thousands of rides every year to help students, be safe and get around campus. There's no telling how many lives Safer Eds has saved over the years. Well, none of them are getting paid to do that, and that'll show up on their resume. But being able to tell that story is really, really important, which is, that's a co-curricular part of their learning that they're seeing. It's the same kind of, way with, a history class. I was a history major as an example. A huge part of my job is to be able to translate work into impact and help folks understand that. Well, that's, Libby mentioned the word narrative. Narrative is something that I've spent a lot of my life with. I mean, any history, any telling of history is a version of narrative. And so that's a key part of how my work manifests now. And that's something that I understand instinctively from that. And so, for a lot of folks, it's just identifying what is it that's happening. But there is also a piece that any process of learning is of value unto itself if you can recognize it as a study of process, which sounds a little ethereal, but is true. Any learning process. I think about this. I think about this all the time with my children. Like, anything can be of meaning if you look at it as something of meaning, and it may not be applied. But what's the angle? What's the part? And as Libby mentioned earlier, what's your purpose as it relates to this? A general education class that you're taking your first year is going to feel more purposeful if it feels connected to what you care about on campus and your plan for what you want to do afterwards.
Sure.
It stops being a sort of, I took an oceanography class in undergrad.
That was the first course I took here at JMU back in 1981, oceanography.
Yeah, it stops being this sort of, hypothetical sounding exercise, and it starts being, what am I going to get out of this that connects to what I want to do here and what I want to do afterwards? And if you understand those things distinctly, which is something that we work on really intentionally in the areas that I work with, if you understand those things, then it's going to be meaningful in a way in real time and then later as well.
Interesting. That's really, really marvelous. Well, the process of students finding their way into the real world has evolved, including some technological advances. And one of the things I think that is a really wonderful development is this platform called Handshake. And we try to make students and families aware of Handshake even during the college search process. We've put the Handshake feeds into the descriptions of majors on jmu.edu in a way to raise awareness that, hey, you know what? Your major has a lot of applicable fields out there, and here are some of the things that are available to JMU students. Are you finding that Handshake is helping to quote-unquote grease the skids somewhat for kids to make that transition?
Yes, all of our students have accounts in Handshake, and when they log into Handshake, then they can see all of the different opportunities. And the way jobs and internships get in Handshake is that an employer selects to post them at JMU, so it is JMU specific. I tell students all the time that reading job descriptions is a good way to learn about opportunities. But there are, 200,000 opportunities in Handshake in an academic year. That's a lot. And so we've also developed this concept of career communities. So we've established 10 career communities, and students can be a member of a career community. And when they join a career community, it gets them even more tailored information. Because one of the challenges in our world today is that there's so much out there. How do you figure out what to pay attention to, and how do you make it more manageable? So these career communities are a way that we're trying to organize some of the information in Handshake to make it more manageable and accessible. So all of our events that we host in the Career Center, all of the employer information sessions that are in Handshake, a lot of them are virtual. Employers are doing information sessions all the time. We've tagged those with career communities. And then we've also mapped the opportunities into career communities. So students will get a newsletter and it'll have, these are the events that are aligned with your career community. These are internships that are new or expiring soon. These are jobs. And so, having a shorter list of things to look at makes everything easier to digest.
And it's in a context, too, that is more easily understood. And I guess, Myles, to that point, it then allows them to begin understanding what their narrative is once they identify themselves as part of a community.
Right. Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think I talk to families at summer orientation every year about a huge goal for us during that process is breaking down. JMU has amazing resources for students. I've worked at other places. I can tell you uniquely that JMU has great resources to help students be successful. We have a building at the center of our campus, which is one of the busiest buildings on campus, called the Student Success Center, which I think of as like a living monument to that commitment.
And it's got a Dunkin' Donuts in it to lure them there.
And an even bigger Dunkin' Donuts coming soon.
Oh, that's great.
But I think it's... I say all the time that it's our job. Sometimes when all the information exists, this sort of wall of information and resources can exist in the world. And I think the career communities help break that down. In the same way, during summer orientation, we talk about sometimes if you have all the information, do you have none of the information? So for our families in particular, we're just banging them all day, every day. Here's how you can understand. Here's how we're going to make more human the resources that exist. Let's give you this scenario and this idea and this way of thinking about things to understand those resources. And I think the career communities are a key way that we're helping our students do that, to go from this huge thing that is job possibilities on the internet to here's a tailored message that you're getting about what may work for you specifically.
That's great.
One of the challenges is that there are some students that we have to disconnect the idea that major equals career.
Right.
And then there are, the other group of students, we need to help them connect what they're learning and to be able to see how it doesn't have to be a history major, can only be a historian. And so that's the challenge. And the students need different things, each of them. That's why we encourage students to come in and meet with one of us in the University Career Center at least once a year to kind of talk over their plans. So it helps us to learn about students and help them set actionable goals that are unique and special to them, versus a lot of information out there. There's advice, but it has to be within a context.
And probably 99% of the people I know at my phase in my career, which is late, will profess that none of them had a straight path, and that there were a lot of surprises along the way and twists and turns that they didn't expect, even the most successful among them.
I think students need that reassurance because they're so afraid of making a mistake,
Right.
or that this one choice is going to limit all of their options forever, when it's just their first stop after graduation or it's their first internship. It doesn't direct where they're going.
Well, I think if our listeners leave with anything, that would be a wonderful thing to take away from this episode. Myles and Libby, thank you so much for joining us and explaining not only the first year outcomes report, but all that there is to offer at JMU, connecting students to the real world, quote unquote. To all of our listeners of Being the Change, you can reach us at beingthechange@jmu.edu. We'd love to hear from you about your ideas to include in a future episode. Myles and Libby, thanks, and maybe we'll have you back.
Great.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time to hear another story of how members of the James Madison University community are being the change. Dive deeper and consume countless other stories at jmu.edu/Madison Magazine. Go Dukes!
The Being the Change podcast was conceived by Jim Heffernan, editor of Madison Magazine, and me, Andy Perrine, head of JMU Marketing. Thanks to Jenna Polk and the team at Rose Library Studios, where the show is recorded by Steve Adderton, the guy who also captures those amazing campus drone shots you see on Instagram. Original music by Neil Perrine and episode production by the Downtown Creative. All of us involved in creating Being the Change are JMU alumni, and we bleed purple. You can find the Being the Change podcast on all popular platforms, where we hope you'll like, share, and subscribe.